If a sudden high-pitched ring pierces the quiet of your right ear, stop what you're doing and listen, not just with your physical hearing, but with the part of you that remembers before words. For some, that small, bright tone is dismissed as a nuisance. For others, it is a needle-sharp signal, a stray nerve, a sign of fatigue. But there is another possibility, one that sits at the junction of Christian imagination and the recorded visions of a man once called the sleeping prophet. In the archive of Edgar Cayce, among thousands of trance readings, you will find a map of how souls tug at the edges of perception, dreams, sense, inner voices, and yes, subtle auditory tones that can announce the arrival of guidance, of a call, of healing to be given and received. Edgar Cayce's work does not ask you to abandon caution. It asks only that widen the aperture of what you consider listenable. He recorded thousands of case files, medical readings, life readings, and a steady stream of dreams that, when read together, sketch a consistent pattern. Patients who came to him with chronic pain left with surprising improvements. Families reported uncanny foresight. Men and women described the same archetypal dream experiences: flying, swimming, meeting ancient ruins, speaking with those who had died, that in Cayce's system indicated capacities the soul carried into incarnation. Those capacities, he suggested, often speak first in small interior ways: a tone like a bell, a pressure behind the eyes, a sudden knowledge that is not learned. If you've ever heard a single clear note inside you, particularly in the right ear, consider that it may be the preface of a larger conversation. If this voice is calling to you, take a moment now, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the practical steps and cautions that follow. Keep listening. Cayce's reputation rests on two pillars: an astonishingly detailed archive and a surprising number of verifiable outcomes. He spoke while in trance, producing readings that touched both medical and spiritual terrain. His medical suggestions, always framed as complimentary, sometimes led to observable improvement when followed alongside conventional care. His life readings traced threads of past experiences and patterns that, to his clients, offered clear keys to present healing. Scholars remain divided, skeptics remain cautious, and many Christians wrestle with Cayce's metaphysical language. Terms like Christ consciousness, Akashic records, and reincarnation are part of his vocabulary and present genuine interpretive challenges. Yet whether one embraces all his conclusions or not, the archive functions as a consistent phenomenological catalog of waking and dream experiences that were transformative for many who encountered them. Here is the core claim we will explore. In Cayce's map, the soul communicates through a small set of recurring dream types and subtle sensory signals.
Those dream types function like an alphabet. The ringing in your ear may be the consonant that begins a word. Understanding the alphabet helps you read the message with care, instead of mistaking it for mere noise. Over the next sections, we will walk through the 7 dream types Cayce identified as signposts of spiritual gifting and mission. For each type, we will tell a case, draw out the practical markers you can notice while awake, and show how a tiny auditory tone, especially in the right ear, might act as a bridge between inner guidance and your waking life. Remember, this is an interpretive frame. The connection between ear ringing and angelic or guide-based communication is a possibility in Cayce's system, not a scientific certainty. Always rule out medical causes first. The first dream type Cayce labeled is the dreaming of flight, levitation, soaring above terrain, rising out of gravity's pull. Margaret's case is one of the clearest narratives tied to this symbol. She arrived at Cayce's circle as a woman shaped by grief and by a fragile hope. In quiet dreams, she found herself afloat above fields and cities, her body feather-light, the wind making no sound. She woke each morning with her limbs tingling and a small, persistent tone in her right ear, a single high note that threaded through the silence like a tuning fork. For months, she treated it as a symptom: poor sleep, nerves, too much coffee. But the dreams multiplied, and with them came waking impulses, an attraction to healing work, and uncanny calm in the presence of the sick. In Cayce's readings, the flying symbol was not mysticism for its own sake, but an emblem of expanded perception. Those who fly in dreams were often destined to move beyond ordinary constraints of identity, to see and act in ways that served others. What did that mean for Margaret practically? Cayce's reading advised a regimen of quiet study, time near water, and disciplined service. Margaret began keeping a small notebook by her bed. Each morning she recorded the quality of the dream: height of the flight, whether turbulence was present, whether she felt a passenger or a pilot. Over time, patterns emerged. When she soared above clear water, she woke with an impression of someone she could help in a particular way, often an emotional or spiritual need. The right ear tone, a bright bell-like ring, often coincided with the clearest dreams, acting like an annunciation. Pay attention, prepare to serve. Those who worked with Margaret described her as unusually steady in crises. Those drawn to her found a voice that seemed to know the precise word to soothe. From Cayce's perspective, the physiology of this inner ringing can be understood in vibrational terms. He often framed the soul's activity in the language of vibration. Higher frequencies correspond to broader states of consciousness.
If consciousness shifts enough to register the presence of spiritual guidance, the nervous system may register that as tone, precisely because the body itself is organized by vibratory patterns. In this frame, the right ear becomes symbolically significant. Cayce and other traditions noticed lateralization, right versus left, as a consistent signpost in psychic phenomena. The right side of the body, associated with giving and outgoing energy, sometimes carries the first impressions of spiritual notice. Thus, a clear tone in the right ear could, in his system, indicate an incoming gift meant to be expressed outwardly. In living practice, the way to enter into a flight-type waking season is not to chase sensation, but to cultivate service. Margaret's discovery was that the ring led not to self-aggrandizement, but to vocation. The inner sound asked her to take responsibility for the small openings she was given, one visit to a hospital bed, one gentle listening at a kitchen table. When she used her awareness, as Cayce recommended, for the healing of others, the tone remained a steady, clarifying bell. When she turned inward and sought prestige, the ring faded and the dreams lost their trajectory. The second survey mark in Cayce's system is the water dream, immersion, swimming, being submerged or rescued from depths. James Thompson's reading offers a model. James had spent his adult life as a machinist. He carried worry like sediment, a hard, steady worry about providing for his family, and a sharper, older fear he could not name. His dreams began as images of being pulled into deep rivers, cold and thick, with currents strong enough to drag him under. In some dreams he found himself calmly floating. In others he struggled until a friendly presence guided him to shore. He reported that his waking ears would sometimes echo with a soft, continuous ringing after particularly vivid water dreams. Unlike Margaret's high bell, James's tone was lower and sustained, what he described as a string that vibrated rather than chimed. Cayce's readings tied these water images to healing capacities tied to emotion and relational empathy. James was not called to float above life, but to wade into it. Cayce's counsel for James was practical. Learn to regulate breath, practice immersion therapy in symbolic forms. Cold water exposure was not suggested as a cure, but careful contact with water as a grounding practice was encouraged, and pay attention to his dreams as tutors for emotional work. Over months, James developed a steady practice of dream journaling. He noticed when the water was clear versus muddied. Clear water correlated with a sense of service while received. Muddy water correlated with unresolved resentment or shame. The ringing in his ear would increase when he ignored relational wounds. It quieted when he took concrete steps to reconcile. A phone call, a confession, an honest conversation with a spouse.
In Cayce's taxonomy, then, water dreams indicate gifts in emotional healing and the ability to empathically swim alongside suffering without being consumed. The auditory signal for James was not an end in itself, but an alert, a summons to compassion. The third type moves us under the earth and back through time, dreams of ancient civilizations. David Kahn's narrative is one frequently cited in the Cayce archive because it connects the dream world with narratives of past lives and the resurfacing of buried memory. David, a boat builder's son, woke with an unshakable image of columns and strange machines half submerged in sand. He would sit up with a startled, clear tone in his right ear, so particular that he could replay it in memory like a recorder. His waking hands often moved with a confidence about materials and forms he could not explain. Under Cayce's reading, the ruins were not mere fantasy. They were echoes of skills and responsibilities carried forward from a previous era, possibly even from the legends of Atlantis that Cayce often referenced. The presence of a right side ringing during these dreams suggested a reactivation of an old toolset, not a guarantee of mastery, but an invitation to reclaim service that the soul once exercised. This is where doctrinal caution is necessary. Cayce's talk of reincarnation and Atlantean returns sits uneasily beside traditional Christian teachings. This perspective, reincarnation, is Cayce's teaching and may not align with all Christian traditions.
The scriptural witness does not explicitly teach multiple earthly returns in the way Cayce describes, and many Christians find that tension real and important. Yet within the Cayce archive, there are consistent case patterns. People who dreamed of ancient cities often awakened with a renewed sense of vocation, an unusual facility with technology or craft, and a strong moral imperative to use whatever resurfaced skills for communal benefit. David translated his dream into work by apprenticing to a local shipwright. When a coastal charity began building small fishing vessels for impoverished communities, David felt compelled to volunteer. His technical gifts flourished in the context of giving. The ringing in his ear became a barometer, louder when his work served others, fading when he pursued commissions for personal gain. The lesson here repeats: gifts amplified by love and service bear fruit. Gifts tethered to self-interest stagnate. The fourth dream type Cayce highlighted is communication with the deceased or with guides, encounters with relatives who have died, with nameless mentors, or with luminous beings who offer counsel. Mary Patterson's case is a careful study in discernment. Mary, a nurse by training, began to receive dreams where she sat at a table with family members long gone. Conversations felt real, with details that later connected to things in her waking world.
Sometimes the dreams came with vivid smells, cigar smoke, lemon oil, or with that same right ear tone, like a signal announcing a message. Mary asked Cayce whether she was hallucinating. The reading proposed a different valence: dreams of clear conversation with moral clarity and counsel that led to compassionate action were likely genuine communications meant to guide ethical choices. Cayce's framework offered criteria for testing such communications. Messages that urged humility, service, and love aligned with what he identified as higher spiritual guidance. Messages that demanded secrecy, elevated the recipient above others, or pushed toward harmful choices were to be distrusted. Mary learned to treat her dream conversations as springboards to action. When a dream relative urged reconciliation with a neighbor, she initiated that reconciliation in waking life. The right ear tone, in these episodes, functioned as a herald. What followed was not spectacle, but a practical nudge toward repair, toward love and action. Across these first four types, a common architecture emerges. The soul presses for expression. Perception registers as dream content and as subtle somatic signals. The proper response is disciplined service. The right ear tone appears in these examples as one recurring motif, sometimes bright and bell-like, sometimes lower and sustained, sometimes accompanied by scent or imagery. In Cayce's thought, the inner ear is less an isolated organ than a node in a network of vibrational correspondence. When you lean into attunement rather than sensation-seeking, the ring becomes a guidepost. At this juncture, it is important to speak plainly about health and discernment. Any persistent or disturbing ringing should first be evaluated by medical professionals. Tinnitus has many causes, and responsible spiritual practice includes attending to the body with competent care. Cayce himself advised that spiritual practices complement, not replace, material remedies when appropriate. He would not have counseled neglect. Let the medical check be your first step. Treat spiritual explanation as an interpretive option that can be explored only after physical causes are understood. If the medical review returns no urgent cause, a careful practice of journaling and attunement can help you read what is happening. Begin with a simple template. Record the time of the ring, the quality of the tone, high, low, sustained, pulsed, any accompanying imagery or dreams, emotions present, and the immediate impulse you felt. Did you feel called to go somewhere, to speak, to write, to help? Over weeks, patterns can emerge. Pair this record with the questions Cayce's readings implicitly recommend. Does this lead me toward humility and service? Does it open me to love rather than to pride? Is there fruit in the waking world, changed behavior, healed relationships, acts of compassion that confirms the prompt?
Before progressing further into the remaining dream types, pause and try a basic attunement exercise that draws on Cayce's emphasis on breath, quiet, and alignment. This is not a ritual, and it is not an occult practice. It is a disciplined attentiveness that puts you in a posture of receptivity without naivete. Find a comfortable seat. Breathe naturally for 3 minutes, allowing each exhale to lengthen slightly. Bring your awareness to the right side of your head, not with force, but with curiosity. Imagine the space behind your right ear like a small room opening inward. Say quietly to yourself, I am available to what guides me toward love and service. Do this without expectation. If a tone is present, simply observe it. Note whether it changes in pitch or intensity as your body shifts from alertness into calm. After 5 to 10 minutes, open your eyes and write down anything you perceived. This practice trains the nervous system to hold stillness, which is the primary way thresholds of perception are honored rather than exploited. Alongside attunement, Cayce recommended 3 ethical guardrails that govern how one tests any inner message. First, alignment. Messages must cohere with love and the moral teachings that cultivate neighbor care. Second, humility. The voice that seeks to aggrandize you as suspect, The voice that sends you outward in service is credible. Third, community. Bring your experience to a trusted, discerning circle, someone steady, experienced, and grounded in prayer or disciplined reflection. Cayce insisted that gifts are not trophies but responsibilities. Use them publicly for the good of others or keep them private until they are tested by fruit. At this point in our narrative, we have explained how the first 4 dream types operate in Cayce's archive and how a right ear ringing might function as a herald for each. We have also laid foundational practices: seek medical assessment, keep a careful journal, cultivate an attunement discipline, and test messages by service and community. The map is beginning to take shape, but several important terrain features remain. The next dream types, the prophetic future dreams, healing in dreams, and encounters with what Cayce called Christ consciousness, require extended attention because they touch on prophecy, the ethics of healing, and the most charged theological language in Cayce's work. These subjects also intersect most directly with the claim in our title, that a high-pitched ringing could be an angelic message you are missing. Before we move deeper, reflect on this. The archive teaches that the same tone can have different meanings for different souls. The ring is not a universal stamp, it is contextual. For one person it signals an invitation to heal, for another it signals a retrieval of craft skills or a call to prophetic warning. Your task is not to chase the ring for sensation, but to read it in the grammar of your life.
The best way to do that is to notice fruit, to invite test, and to adopt disciplines that keep your mind and heart oriented toward love. Consider a brief story that sits at the border of prophetic dreaming and public consequence. Eleanor Walsh awoke with a recurring nightmare of financial buildings collapsing into streets full of panicked people. She described a sharp ringing in her right ear that always followed these dreams. At the time, she and her husband were comfortable, watching events at a distance. The dreams pressed her to speak. She made no claims of omniscience, but she began to share what she saw with a small circle. Some of her warnings, over time, coincided with real market tremors. Cayce's papers preserve Eleanor's file as an example of prophetic gifting that needed rigorous testing. Her ring was a summons to attention, but attention requires humility. She did not predict dates or guarantee outcomes. Instead, she invited preparedness, ethical stewardship, care for the vulnerable, and sober action. This is a critical note. Prophecy in Cayce's world is not a crystal ball used to gain advantage. It is a call to love in circumstances where many are vulnerable to harm. Where prophetic impressions are clear, Cayce urged people to use them to ease suffering, not to profit. The ringing in the right ear here is a redirection of the will. If what you hear points to someone's need, go meet it. We will pause the detailed Cayce trail here to keep the focus sharp and to leave room for the living practices and the final tests that truly distinguish authentic spiritual prompting from wishful thinking. What remains ahead is the fuller unpacking of healing in dreams and the encounters Cayce described as Christ consciousness, matters that require patient theological care and careful practical instruction. Those sections will trace the ethical boundaries of working for healing, the danger of seeking power, and the precise ways Cayce recommended verifying that a dream gift bears fruit. For now, sit with what you've recorded. Look for patterns in the tone, brightness, persistence, side, and in the life it seems to call you toward. If there is a single guiding thread up to this point, it is this: the soul's little signals, like a bell in the right ear, are not invitations to spectacle. They are summons to service. If they are genuine, their test is not the intensity of sensation, but the humility of response and the healing that follows. If they are genuine, their test is not the intensity of sensation, but the humility of response and the healing that follows. The archive's next instruction concerns a particular dream class Cayce called healing in dreams, a category in which the dreamer is not merely a recipient of images but an active agent of care. Robert Chen's file is emblematic.
Robert, a quiet man who worked as a machinist by day and tended an informal healing circle by night, began reporting recurring nocturnal scenes in which he moved through rooms crowded with people who were ill. In the dream, he did no dramatic surgery. Rather, he placed hands where the need felt centered, and a sense of warmth, a narrowing of the noise around the suffering body, would follow. He woke from these dreams with a gentle ringing in his right ear, a tone like a tuning fork held at the edge of hearing, and with the memory of a scent he could not place. Over weeks, neighbors reported inexplicable ease and pain after Robert had simply sat and listened to them, or after he had offered a brief touch and a prayer. Cayce's readings for Robert emphasized 2 complementary points. First, that the dream activity corresponded to a genuine capacity for comfort and energetic reordering, and second, that the gift required strict ethical containment. Robert was told to work only with consent, always in accompaniment of prayer or an appeal to the highest good, and to remit any temptation to claim credit. In Cayce's vocabulary, healing in dreams is less a secret of power and more a pattern of attunement. The dream acts like a rehearsal hall. The soul practices compassionate interventions in a field where outcome is not guaranteed, but intention can be sharpened. For Robert, the right ear tone functioned as a signal that the rehearsal had meaning for waking life. But Cayce insisted that the true verification of any such dream activity was fruit, measurable relief, improved relationships, clearer moral choices in the person's life. In case after case, the readings discourage any form of mercenary use. Where a dream gift was exploited for status or financial gain, the dream content dwindled and the ring quieted. Where the gift was disciplined into routine acts of service, the dream scenes grew richer, and the auditory phenomena, when present, settled into a steady, encouraging presence. This leads to a practical discernment rule drawn from the archive. When healing impressions arrive, treat them like a summons to apprenticeship, not certification. Learn techniques from competent practitioners, seek oversight, work within community structures, and maintain a written record of cases, always safeguarding confidentiality and welfare. Cayce's circle included many who learned massage, nursing, counseling skills, or simply deep listening. The point was not the glamorous miracle, but the persistent presence of love enacted by ordinary people. Closely allied to healing dreams are encounters Cayce often summarized under the banner of Christ consciousness. This phrase is charged. To many it feels theologically foreign, to others evocative of the highest human emulation of Jesus' spirit. Martha Johnson's story offers a careful window.
Martha came to a hard season, the failing of a marriage, the loss of a trusted friend, and in that hollow of grief she began to dream of a luminous figure who neither preached nor condemned, but simply radiated a moral clarity that reorganized her priorities. The dreams were accompanied, on occasion, by the same right-side ringing that had accompanied Margaret's flights and Robert's healings. In the morning, she would hold a memory of a short phrase, never grandiose, always practical, "Go with the one who needs you." Under Cayce's reading, these encounters were not hallucinations of divinity in the theatrical sense, but invitations to embody a quality of love that heals and reorients life. Here is an essential caveat built into the Cayce frame, and one you should hold always. When Cayce uses Christ consciousness, he is describing an idealized field of moral alignment in which compassion, forgiveness, and service operate as the primary energy. He does not intend to replace orthodox doctrines about the person and work of Jesus. Rather, he interprets those doctrines through a metaphysical lens that reads Christ as the highest vibrational expression available to humans. That statement is interpretive and not a capitulation of official Christian confession. Many believers will find resonance with Cayce's emphasis on love. Others will want to bracket the metaphysical scaffolding around that emphasis. The healthy posture is one of charitable curiosity. Examine the fruit of any such encounters. Do lives change for the better? Do attachments loosen? Are relationships healed? If so, the moral content bears scrutiny independent of metaphysical taxonomy. Martha's transformation was precisely practical. The dream phrases she carried led her to volunteer at a shelter, to reconcile with family members, and to surrender a lucrative but cold-hearted job. Her sensory episodes, the ringing and ephemeral sense, diminished as the life realigned, which fits a recurring pattern in the readings. Inner phenomena are often threshold markers. They are felt intensely in the season of transition, then settle into background as the soul's new habits become steady action. From dream work, we turn to the afterlife architecture that Cayce describes at length: funeral observation, the life review, and a cosmic repository he sometimes called the Hall of Records. These topics are both consoling and theologically fraught for many listeners, so our responsibility here is carefulness and clarity. Cayce reported that those who pass through death experience a sequence that includes a period of adjustment, a review in which love's quality is the key metric, and an opportunity for learning and planning before re-entry in some future form. The life review, as Cayce characterized it, is not merely a ledger of successes and sins measured by legal certainty, but a felt panorama in which one sees the ripple of one's choices through other lives. The dominant note in these descriptions is always love. Where love was present, the review is experienced as warmth and affirmation. Where neglect or harm was present, the review is felt as an invitation to repair. These afterlife scenes are important for how they reshape present living. If you imagine, as Cayce does, that you will stand in a mirrored field to see the consequences of your choices, then the logic of small acts becomes acute. The right ear ringing, in that moral frame, can be read as the soul's internal bell reminding you that choices are cumulative. It is not a threat, it is notice. People report that when they begin to practice accountability and service, the haunting or sharpness of their interior phenomena calms. That suggests the ring's function is corrective as often as it is revelatory. The Hall of Records image that Cayce often mentioned has fascinated many. He described, metaphorically, a vast repository of essence and pattern in which a soul's history, motifs, talents, lessons can be accessed. Cayce uses this as one way to explain how someone might intuit a skill from a past existence or recall a moral lesson before they were born. Again, reiterate the doctrinal guardrail. These descriptions belong to Cayce's metaphysical map and may not align with every Christian theology. Yet, treated as poetic or phenomenological language, they can be helpful. The Hall of Records functions like a memory palace, a way to account for a phenomenon where people suddenly recall a craft or hold a compassion that feels older than their biography. When we move from the afterlife to the question of reincarnation and Atlantis, the caution intensifies. Cayce's corpus includes explicit passages in which he places some souls as having prior incarnations in ancient civilizations, including the legendary Atlantis. He ties this to patterns of aptitude and to certain karmic openings that require repair in modern lives. David Kahn's earlier case, with its columns and sunken machines, exemplifies this. Skills arising without clear training, a strong sense of moral obligation tied to ancient roles. For many listeners, these claims will be unacceptable. For others, they form a coherent explanatory model. The most responsible posture is this: present the claim, mark it clearly as Cayce's teaching, and encourage viewers to examine it through the twin lenses of Scripture and conscience. Cayce also suggested that the late 20th and early 21st centuries mark a spiritual turning broad enough to involve many returning souls, people with latent capacities reactivating to meet massive humanitarian needs. He pointed to an era of awakening wherein gifts previously held in reserve would surface at scale. Whether one accepts the specifics or not, the practical implication is sound. Extraordinary times call for ordinary souls to be ready.
If you hear a ring in your ear, the immediate question is not whether you came from Atlantis, but whether you are available to meet a need in your context. The ring can be read as an invitation to readiness. From cosmological frames to concrete action, what should you do the next time a high-pitched ring hits your right ear and your curiosity leans toward spiritual interpretation? There is a stepwise protocol rooted in both careful discernment and practical tradition that aligns with Cayce's counsel and honors medical prudence. First, rule out urgent medical causes. If you experience sudden, intense, or distressing auditory phenomena, seek a qualified healthcare assessment. Tinnitus can indicate treatable conditions. Do not postpone medical attention. Use this step not as an obstacle to spirituality, but as a stewardship of the gift of the body. Second, create a disciplined journal practice. Use the following template for each episode: date and time of the ringing, location and immediate activity, quality of the tone, high-pitched, low, continuous, intermittent, pulsing, laterality, right ear, left ear, or both, any dream remembered surrounding the event, brief synopsis, any accompanying sensations, pressure behind eyes, scent, warmth, shiver, immediate impulse or prompting, go to someone, write a note, call, volunteer, resulting action taken within 24 to 72 hours, short note on outcome and whether the prompt seemed to produce help or harm. Use this template consistently for at least 8 weeks. Patterns will reveal themselves. Repeated prompts to the same kind of action or a consistent correlation with particular kinds of dreams are meaningful. Cayce's circle found that the careful record, paired with communal feedback, was a primary tool of verification. Third, practice a structured attunement that is simple, repeatable, and ethically framed. The following script is offered as a Cayce-informed method of quieting the nervous system and inviting discernment. Sit comfortably with a written journal and pen nearby. Use slow, natural breathing to settle for 3 to 5 minutes. On the out-breath, imagine releasing tension from the jaw and shoulders. After the breath settles, direct your attention gently toward the right side of the head. Without forcing, mentally echo the phrase, "If this is right and leads to love, I will receive. If it leads to harm or pride, I release." Allow 3 minutes of receptive silence. If a tone is present, do not chase it, simply observe. After 5 to 10 minutes, write down any impressions. The prayerful framing prevents the exercise from becoming a selfish experiment and aligns it with service. Fourth, test messages through fruit. The most reliable verification is results. If you are prompted to visit a neighbor, does your presence ease a burden? If you are called to speak up, does your word protect rather than shame? Cayce proposed 3 ethical tests: alignment with love and neighbor care, humility in motivations, and community confirmation. Use these as criteria before acting on any strong impression.
A particularly useful practical rule: wait 24 hours before acting on any impulse to make a major life change. Use the waiting period to seek counsel from a trusted friend or mentor and to check the journal for pattern. Fifth, build community and oversight. Cayce's readers often worked within a small circle of steady companions who could review impressions and provide pastoral balance. There are modern equivalents: a spiritual director, a pastor, a therapist with openness to spiritual phenomena, or a discernment group of disciplined friends. Bring selected episodes to them for evaluation, not as a performance, but as accountability. Sixth, train in a craft of service. Every gift in the Cayce archive that grew robustly did so in the context of training. If your ring seems to signal healing, study nursing, counseling, massage, grief ministry, whatever pathway channels compassion into safe, ethical help. If it signals prophetic warning, develop media and pastoral skills that allow you to speak truth with gentleness and accompanied by humility. The ring alone does not sanctify method. Skill and structure matter. Seventh, maintain the non-negotiable guardrail. Refuse to turn gifts into commerce or prestige. If the tone comes with a temptation to demand fees, honors, or public acclaim detached from service, regard it suspect. Cayce's archive repeatedly shows gifts diminishing under egocentric use. For many listeners, the question of danger will arise. Can such phenomena be deceptive? The answer in Cayce's work is cautious: yes. Unregulated inner experiences can open avenues for confusion or for seductive inner voices. Cayce's advice is not to cut off curiosity, but to enclose it with prudence, medical review, journal records, community input, and the primacy of love. If a message instructs harm, secrecy, or self-elevation, treat it as suspect. If it pushes towards service, reconciliation, and concrete compassion, it is more likely to be credible. There is a practical week-by-week training schedule that many in the Cayce community found helpful when a series of phenomena began. 6 weeks to create a stable practice of discernment. Week 1, medical check and baseline journaling. Begin the template, collect 2 weeks of baseline entries, and see a medical professional if advisable. Week 2, daily 5-minute attunement and a single act of service each day, small, a kind text, a listening phone call. Week 3, bring 1 episode to a trusted mentor and ask for feedback, continue journaling and attunement. Week 4, engage a structured learning resource, book, local course related to your likely calling, pastoral care, first aid, grief counseling. Week 5, undertake a dedicated service project with supervision, visit a shelter with a seasoned volunteer. Week 6. Review journal patterns, mentor feedback, and fruit experienced. Decide whether to pursue an ongoing vocational shift or place the gifts in a posture of quiet readiness. Cayce's archive also contains counsel for those who find themselves in the grip of addiction or compulsion, scenes where inner rings or dreams function as both alarm and medicine. Addiction, in Cayce's frame, is often the spirit's cry for reconnection. The figure of the addicted person in the archive is not morally condemned, but observed as someone whose center has been fractured. The remedy is not merely willpower, but re-enchantment, remembering the soul's larger story, entering a community that models disciplined love, and submitting to practices of surrender and service. The ring can act as a rescue bell, an invitation to re-enter life intentionally. Consider a composite vignette that draws on themes in the archive. A man who worked nights and drank to quiet an old hurt begins to hear a persistent high-pitched ring in his right ear on the mornings he stays sober. At first, he interprets it as guilt, but through journaling, he notices that days he acts to repair a broken relationship, the sound softens. He joins a circle for recovery rooted in service, volunteering with a youth program, and the ring ceases to be punitive. It becomes a rhythm pointing him back to life. Cayce's advice in such cases includes 3 elements: practical care, medical and therapeutic, daily service to others, and a practice of remembrance, daily recording of dreams and impulses. Addiction reshapes when the soul is given a vocational pathway that channels desire outward. To help you integrate these guidelines, here are several reflective exercises to use periodically. Each exercise is meant to foster grounded discernment and to cultivate the moral habits that, in Cayce's map, sustain genuine gifts. Exercise A, the mirror day. Choose one day in which you practice observing consequences. At 3 intervals, ask, what did my word do? What did my presence do? What did my silence do? Record answers. Use them at week's end to assess where the ring's prompts correlate with real effects. Exercise B,
The question circle. With 2 trusted people, commit a 30-minute meeting once a month to bring 1 episode. The circle asks, does this invitation produce humility? Does it increase compassion? Does it lead to a measurable good? Decide together whether to test the impulse in the week to come. Exercise C, the somatic anchor. When the ring occurs, place a hand on your chest and speak aloud. If this is good, let it make me kind. If it is not, let me release it. This anchors the experience in ethical intention and prevents reflexive action. People will, quite properly, ask practical FAQs. 17 common questions, briefly answered here, address anxieties and bring clarity from the Cayce perspective. 1. Is the ringing always spiritual? No. It may be medical, environmental, or neurologic.
Medical review comes first. Is the right ear always more significant than the left? In Cayce's cases, the right side appears often as a symbol of outgoing, giving energy. It is a pattern, not a law. Left side phenomena can be meaningful too. How do I know it's an angelic message rather than my imagination? Test for fruit. Does the guidance lead to tangible help, humility, and improved relationships? Bring it to community. Can children experience this? Yes. If so, ensure medical evaluation and provide gentle communal oversight. Teach simple grounding practices rather than making children spiritual experiments. What if the ring tells me to do something risky? Do not follow impulses that harm self or others. Refuse secrecy. Seek counsel. Can I turn on the ring by practicing attunement? Disciplined practice can increase receptivity, but it can also amplify normal bodily sensitivity. Approach with humility and test by fruit. Is this a cult? It depends on intention and method. Cayce's emphasis was prayer, service, and moral accountability. Avoid practices that fetishize power or secrecy. How do I balance Cayce's metaphysics with my faith tradition? Use Cayce as phenomenological data. The archive reports patterns. Evaluate them against scripture and conscience. If I act on a prompt and it hails, was it false? Not necessarily. The archive treats promptness as probabilistic and subject to human freedom. Failures are learning moments, not proofs of deception. Could this be demonic? The archive advises moral tests. Messages that coerce, shame, or demand harm are suspect. Always bring such prompts into community and prayer. Should I stop medical treatment and trust spiritual care? No. Cayce recommended complementary care. Do not abandon professional treatment. What practices help share discernment with others? Clear journaling, mentorship, and small discernment groups. Is there a risk of addiction to spiritual experiences? Yes. The archive warns against chasing phenomena. Keep service as the anchor and check motives honestly. What if I never hear an auditory ring but feel nudges? Many people experience guidance as feelings, images, or words. The ring is one form among many. How public should I be about experiences? Prefer private testing and community confirmation before public claims. Are there physical practices that support attunement? Rest, breathwork, hydration, regulated sleep, and gentle fasting of media and noise can help. Where can I learn more? Seek primary sources handled responsibly and consult trusted community and mentors. As the archive suggests, learning to read subtle signals is both an inward apprenticeship and a communal vocation. The latter cannot be overstated. Human accountability protects both the sensitive person and the community they serve. We now return to larger frames. How do these personal practices sit inside Cayce's wider moral plea?
Cayce insisted that spiritual gifts are ordained for service and the circulation of love. He framed prayer not as a petition list, but as a state of alignment, what he sometimes called asking in a vibrational key. Ask and you shall receive, he interpreted, not as a transactional formula, but as an attunement. When your inner life matches the qualities you seek, discipline, humility, compassion, you will more readily receive the capacities to act. This translates into practice. When you approach your ring with the posture of service, you are more likely to hear prompts that connect to neighbor care. When you approach it with the posture of self-aggrandizement, you will be led into confusion or silence. This principle is the ethical linchpin of the archive and frames every recommendation we have outlined. A theological appendix is necessary to clarify the most sensitive points. Cayce's language about reincarnation, Akashic records, and Christ consciousness should be understood as his interpretive framework for experiences that many religious traditions also try to account for in their own vocabularies. From a pastoral perspective, 3 clarifications are helpful. First, the moral center of Cayce's teaching, the primacy of love, humility, and service, overlaps with central Christian imperatives and can be embraced without adopting every metaphysical claim. One can take Cayce's ethical counsel seriously while reserving judgment about his cosmological assertions. Second, on reincarnation,
Cayce offered a model in which many souls undergo multiple incarnations for learning and service. This is not a mainstream Christian doctrine and raises complex theological questions about the uniqueness of life, resurrection, and judgment. For those in traditions that reject reincarnation, Cayce's model can be read functionally. Whether or not literal multiple lives occur, the important pastoral truth is that souls often carry deep patterns that require sustained effort, and that the ethical demand remains, to heal, to forgive, to love. Third, on Christ language, when Cayce speaks of Christ as a state, Christ consciousness, he is describing the ethical apex of human being, an orientation of love that rescues and transforms. Christian listeners may interpret this through the covenantal incarnational story of Jesus. Others may treat it as metaphor. Either way, evaluate claims by their fruit. Does the teaching draw people toward humility, mercy, and neighbor care? If so, it deserves respectful attention. In the final movement of this narrative, consider again the motif that opened this conversation, a sudden high-pitched ring in the right ear. We have traced how, in Cayce's archive, such a phenomenon might map onto a vast field of spiritual possibility, signals of flight, water, ancient vocation, guide contact, prophetic witnessing, healing activation, or Christ-like invitation.
We have offered practical protocols, guardrails, and exercises to help you test and steward such experiences. We close with an ethical summons that is both urgent and consoling. Do not treat the ring as a ticket to power. Treat it as a call to service. Let your life be the laboratory in which the ring is proved. If the sound calls you to visit, go. If it calls you to speak, speak gently and in accompaniment. If it calls you to learn, apprentice. If it calls you to stop, obey the stopping. The archive's persistent lesson is that interior phenomena belong to the social order of compassion. They exist to increase the capacity of persons to love and to repair. If this message has moved something inside you, if you have a single moment in which a tone arrived and life shifted, share it below. Describe one concrete time you heard a strange tone or had a vivid recurring dream and what you did with it. Your testimony can be a lamp for someone else's next step. May your listening be guarded by wisdom. May your gifts be circumscribed by humility. And may every inner bell that wakes you wake you towards the neighbor at your door. May you find community that disciplines and loves, mentors that steady, and practices that transform curiosity into service. May the ring you hear, if indeed it comes from beyond your ordinary senses, never draw you into selfishness, but always towards hands that mend, mouths that bless, and feet that go. If you are moved to continue this work with others, explore resources at reputable centers that study Edgar Cayce's readings and offer supervised training, and bring every prompt to a circle that will both test it and help you act on it for the good of others. Be wise, be humble, and be ready. Amen.